Lynn, do we have, do you think we can go forward?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. I like to be prompt. Good afternoon. I'm Pam Sebesky, Chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB's February 16th, 2022 meeting to order. We continue with our virtual meeting format due to the prevailing concerns about the latest variant of the coronavirus. But next month will mark the 2-year anniversary of the continuous virtual meetings of this board. Who would have thought? We also continue to live stream the audio and video of this meeting on TPB YouTube channel. While we are familiar with our process for these virtual meetings, for the benefit of those following the meeting online, I will briefly review the procedures we will be following during this virtual meeting. To start the meeting, I will ask staff to take a roll call of the members or alternates to document your presence at this meeting and determine that we have a quorum. Then for the action item on the agenda, I will have the presenter complete their briefing, then invite a motion to approve any resolution we plan to adopt and seek a second for the motion made. After the motion has been made and seconded, I will invite questions or comments in turn by jurisdiction. For calling for a vote, because for the vote, I will seek just the nays and abstentions and take the rest as yes votes. I will call for the votes in turn by jurisdiction. For the information items, I will have the presenters complete their briefing and then invite questions and comments in turn by jurisdictions. I do want to adhere to the schedule and conclude the meeting on time if at all possible. So I request all to be mindful of their time during your comments and questions so that we might be able to do that. Last, a friendly reminder to mute your microphones always, and importantly to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you speak. Lynn, if you would please take the roll call and confirm we have a quorum.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to list the jurisdiction or agency, and if you could state your name, I'll record your presence. If I go too fast, I'll be monitoring the participant chat and the list as well. So not to worry, we will capture you. All right, District of Columbia, District Council, Ms. Pinto or Ella Hansen? District Council, Charles Allen. District Council, Christina Henderson.
Here.
Thanks. District Office of Planning.
Kristen Gulkin's here for office.
Thanks. District Department of Transportation.
Leslie Rupert's here for our director.
Thanks, Leslie. Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County.
Present.
Sorry, did I skip the City of Bowie? Okay, so Charles County's present, but is it Mr. Collins? Yes. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. College Park.
Patrick Land here.
Thanks.
Denise Mitchell here.
Thanks. Frederick County.
Mark Mishler here.
Thank you. City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell here.
Thanks. City of Gaithersburg.
Neil Harris here.
Dennis Hunflinger here.
Gotcha. City of Greenbelt.
Emmett Jordan here.
Good morning. Good afternoon. It's good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
City of Laurel.
Brian Lee is here.
Thanks. Welcome. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich is here.
Montgomery County Legislative.
Evan Glass is here.
Thank you. Prince George's County Executive.
Victor Weisberg is here.
Thanks. Prince George's County Legislative. And here, Danielle. City of Rockville.
Bridget Newton's here.
Thank you. Tacoma Park.
Casey Kostick's here.
Thank you. Maryland House of Delegates. I think they're a little busy this time. Maryland Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation. Okay, moving on to Virginia. City of Alexandria.
Scannick. Present.
Hello. Thanks. Arlington County.
I'm here, Tax Carantonis.
Thanks. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
This is David Meyer from the City of Fairfax.
Got you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
And Fairfax County, Walter Alcorn's here.
And James Walkinshaw's here.
Okay, thanks. Got you both. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here.
Thanks. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger here. I'm sorry, couldn't find the mute button.
No worries. I know I'm fast. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstattd here.
Thanks.
Bob Brown, alternate, also here.
Gotcha. City of Manassas.
Pam Sabesky. Good afternoon, everybody.
Gotcha. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Ruschel here.
Thanks. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Victor Angry here.
Gotcha both. Thank you. Virginia House of Delegates. So Mr. Reed said he would not be attending. Is there a person from his office here? Virginia Senate. Virginia Department of Transportation.
Good afternoon, John Lynch here.
Thanks. WMATA.
Allison Davis.
Thanks. And then moving on to our ex officio, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission.
Hi, Julia Coster's here. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service.
Hi, Tammy Stidham's here.
Thanks, Tammy. So that concludes our roll call. We have a quorum.
Yes, Earl Lewis is here via phone.
Thanks, Earl.
Thank you. That's great. Lynn, would you please summarize any comments we may have received from the public?
Great, thanks. Thank you, Chair Sabesky. For the February 22nd, 2022 TPB meeting, we received a total of 2 comments that were emailed to us. A memo with a summary of the comments, as well as the comments themselves, can be found on our TPB meeting page. The first comment is an email from Stuart Schwartz of the Coalition for Smarter Growth. So on behalf of the Metro Now Coalition, which includes the Coalition for Smarter Growth, Stuart shared Metro Now's Bus Transformation Project Progress Report and their accompanying press release, and he shared an invitation to their February 2nd event. The second comment we received was an email from Miss Arlene Montemarano, who sent an article from Greater Washington titled "More Lanes on I-95 Won't Fix Virginia Traffic Woes." That concludes the comments that we've received, and all the comments are found on our meeting page. Thanks, Chair Sabesky.
Thank you so much. As usual, we start with the review and adoption of the minutes of the January 19th, 2022 meeting. I invite a motion to adopt the minutes as provided. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion. I'll move
So moved.
adoption.
Tax Card Antonis, Hardigan County.
I'll second that. Emmett Jordan from Greenbelt.
Great. Any corrections or additions to the meeting minutes? Okay. For the vote then, nays or abstentions, remember to state your name and jurisdiction. Otherwise, everything will be considered a yes. From the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, WMATA or other agencies. Okay, looks like a unanimous approval there, Lynn. We have a written summary of the February 4th meeting. This is the technical committee meeting. I trust you all have read it. Let me now recognize Matt Arcieri, chair of the technical committee. Matt, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on? Matt here? Okay. Conti, do you have any thoughts on what we should do? I guess maybe Mr. Arcieri.
I think, thank you, Ms. Chair. Lynn, would you mind just providing a report of the tech committee?
Sure. So just give me 1 second to pull up the report. All right. Okay, so our tech committee met on February 4th. And so there were 1, 2, 3, all the items that we talked about that we're getting a presentation on at the TPB today were presented at Tech. So we got a preview of the TAP funding projects. We heard a briefing on the Unified Planning Work Program and the Commuter Connections Work Program. We saw a preview of the draft transit asset management targets. And we also spent some time talking about the item on item 11 today, which is the climate change elements in the long range plan, how staff is planning to seek input. So you will hear a lot about that later today. We also heard information on the draft inputs for the 2023 to 2026 Transportation Improvement Program. As you all know, you've been hearing about the long range plan itself and how it's going to be approved in June. Well, the TIP gets updated at the same time, and there's a whole lot of work that goes into that. So Andrew spent some time talking about how we're getting our inputs and our schedule for that. And we heard a presentation on the draft update of the bicycle and pedestrian plan for the National Capital Region. And lastly, Stacy gave us an update on the TPB Resiliency Study, findings and next steps. So that basically was our tech committee presentation or our tech committee meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Are there any questions from Lynn from Maryland, DC, Virginia, Vermont, or other agencies? Okay, we're going to move along then. We have reports from 2 of our committees today. Let me start with the Community Advisory Committee. We have a written summary of the February 10th meeting that they had. Let me recognize the chair, Ashley Hudson. Ashley, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on? Welcome.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Vice Mayor Sebeski. So as mentioned, our Community Advisory Committee met on Thursday, February 10th for an online only meeting. Similar to the technical committee, Stacy Cook briefed us on the TPB Resiliency Study. And from that, the committee discussed their perception of how resilient the Washington region's transportation system is. One person suggested that the electrical grid is a weak point, and another expressed concern about cybersecurity. The committee agreed about the importance of maintaining and updating infrastructure to make the region more resilient. And they also suggested looking to regions in the world with vulnerabilities to identify best practices for building and maintaining resilient infrastructure. Michael Farrell also briefed the committee on a draft update to the bicycle and pedestrian plan for the National Capital Region. He described how the plan incorporates bicycle and pedestrian planning locally in the region alongside related COG and TPB policies. The committee was very interested in this presentation, and they asked questions with curiosity to how the plan includes regional standards for consistent signage, as well as information about bicycle parking. So we then broke out into, first Brian briefed us on a survey that we, the CAC members, took. This survey ranked possible priorities based on member perception of how important the priority is to their community. Some of the highest ranked priorities included promoting regional transportation priorities, funding for transportation maintenance, ensuring transportation equity, and improving transportation safety. The interesting finding from this survey, I believe, is that not all CAC members come to the meetings with the perspective of their community in mind. Vice Mayor Sebeski and I talked prior to CAC meetings to ensure I am representing the voice of the city of Manassas, and we believe this practice helps achieve consensus from one group to the next. Members of the CAC expressed a desire for the opportunity to meet the TPB officials from their region so they can learn their elected officials' priorities and have the chance to share their concerns. We believe this could be done virtually using breakout rooms by state. This could happen during the next or one of the future CAC meetings or on a completely separate date. But we believe that there is value in strengthening the connections between the CAC and the TPB. Finally, the committee also divided into small groups to discuss how the CAC can work on promoting regional transportation priorities so their communities can stay informed. So that means taking in the advice from their elected officials and then also spreading that to the groups that they're involved in within their communities. And that wraps up my comments from Thursday's meeting. And thank you, Ms. Sebeski, for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Ashley, for that great report. And I am excited to hear that the CAC members that don't, like you and I, have regular contact so that there is that communication across all levels. So I look forward to, I will direct staff to work together to try to find some time that the two groups could connect virtually, and recognizing that there's probably no way that both groups, all members, would probably be able to do a complete meet, but I will allow staff to work on that. And I have talked with Conti a little bit about that, and if at least the working with the executive committee of the TPB to meet with this group as a whole, and probably even going in the future, probably having those kinds of meetings. So we'll probably hear more about this in the future, and we will go from there. But with that, I will invite questions, other questions from anyone in Virginia. Okay, I don't think I'm missing any hands. How about Maryland? The District of Columbia, WMATA, and other agencies. Okay. So now I turn to our colleague Kanik from the City of Alexandria, who chairs the Access for All Advisory Committee, for a report on the work the committee is engaged in. Kanik, I understand you had a very packed agenda this month. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we didn't have too many agenda items, but like you said, it was packed. There's a lot of information to go through. But we met this past Friday on the 11th. And the first item that we went over was the 2021 solicitations and all the projects that were selected. Ms. Winchell-Mendy gave us a breakdown of the 21 projects that are being funded in 2021 and the next steps for project implementation. And I think just a cool stat for everybody to know, including this round of solicitations, we're totaling about 92 projects at $34 million in federal and matching funds. So clearly a lot of work getting done, really exciting. And staff is currently confirming federal compliance and beginning the application process for obtaining Federal Transit Administration approval. So those are moving along well. There were a couple of questions about budget cuts to Metro Access and how this might impact some of the funded projects, but we're still kind of working through some of that. We also received an update of the 2022 Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan for the National Capital Region. And a large part of the work for the AFA in 2022 will be providing input into the plan components for the next 4-year update. So we'll be going over inventory of existing service, unmet need, strategies, and priority projects. We also received a report on the TPB Climate Change Mitigation Study results, as well as an update on the draft 2022 Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan for the National Capital Region. This one definitely created a lot of discussion. We were talking about the requirements for locking scooters, and even if they are locked, what are they locked to? Are they an impediment to wheelchairs or to folks with walkers and issues like that? We were also talking about what is kind of the definition of pedestrian, and should there be more inclusive language? And one of the words that came up was rolling, because if you're in a wheelchair or you're using a walker or something else, you might be rolling as opposed to simply walking as a pedestrian or in a pathway. So some of the stuff that we were talking about, and also the lack of bikes or scooters, adaptive bikes or scooters, for folks that have some impediments for walking or might be wheelchair bound, whatever it might be. So just seeing how we could change some of the language that we're using and making sure that we're remembering to include all of our folks in our community. And the last thing that we basically covered was the meeting dates. And as always, everyone is always welcome to join us at the Access for All Committee. And the next 4 meetings will be April 8th, July 1st, September 2nd, and December 16th. And with that, that's the end of my report, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that report. And I will ask staff, if it hasn't been done already, to share those dates with the full TPB board in case anyone is interested. And with that, I will ask for questions from WMATA and other agencies. Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Okay. Thank you, Kanik. Appreciate the report and all the work that your group is doing. Okay. We have a written summary of the February 4th Steering Committee meeting and the Director's Report. Conti, is there anything you would like to highlight and anything new to share with the board?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. I will provide a very brief overview of the items in the memo. I won't get into the details, but I'm happy to answer questions. The TPB approved 2 amendments to its TIP at the February 4th meeting. Both amendments were from Maryland. The first amendment had added funds for 2 projects. First, it added about $12 million for some intersection improvements at the Brack intersection at Maryland 337 and Maryland 218 in Prince George's County. And the second project received about $9.5 million for preliminary engineering for a new interchange at Medical Center Drive and I-95-495. The second amendment from Maryland was also to add about $3 million in funds for a replacement of the Poplar Hill Road Bridge over the Zikia Swamp Run in Charles County. And the details are on pages 17 through 21 of my memo. Next, in the letters sent and received section on page 23, is a copy of a letter from COG's Executive Director Chuck Bean to Maryland Delegate Al Carr. Delegate Carr had notified the Council of Governments about a bill, HB 469, that he had co-sponsored and introduced in the Maryland General Assembly, which would essentially allow Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration to set up a pilot program with other states on a reciprocity arrangement for citations issued by red light running cameras. You will recall that the TPB had written a letter to the governors and the mayor about this. The COG board wrote a letter to the governors and mayor about it this past December, and that letter was shared with Delegate Carr. Next, in the announcement and updates section on page 28 is a memo from staff, Sarah Barnes, that provides some background on the third and final element of the Voices of the Region initiative that we undertook. You will recall this was undertaken as part of updating our long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2045. This third element was a campaign where staff went out and met with the residents of the region at locations where there was an active project that matched very well with one of the 7 TPB's aspirational initiatives. And we got input from the residents, particularly asking them how such projects and programs that were advancing the aspirational initiatives, how are they actually affecting their mobility, their lifestyle? How are they benefiting from it? So we wanted to get a context of what does all of this long-range transportation planning work actually mean and how does it affect and impact our residents. The detailed report is included at the end of my memo. I would certainly recommend reading it. It's a very good insight into how the TPB's work impacts and is received by the residents of the region. On page 53 is a summary of various campaigns that the Commuter Connections program has launched, I would say since last year, but some of those elements are now being implemented this year. The entire campaign is focused on getting people back to ride sharing, whether it is carpooling, whether it's van pooling or transit. We are anticipating the return to office and we want people coming back into carpools and van pools and transit. So we have undertaken a number of campaigns and the memo describes some of them. Lastly, a reminder that the deadline for applications from the members for receiving the Transportation Land Use Connections grants is February 22nd. And the deadline for members to receive the Regional Roadway Safety Program grant is March 18th. That's a quick overview, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Conti. And are there any questions from the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia? Did I miss somebody?
Yeah, Madam Chair, this is
Casey, go
Casey
ahead.
from Park. Thanks. Thanks. I had two comments with regard to the Voices of the Region survey, which I really appreciated and found really useful in terms of understanding, as you said, the impact of the work and the perspectives from around the region. One of my concerns is that both in this initiative and also in the previous one that we discussed last month regarding the Voices of the Region, the input from people under 18 just did not seem to be robust in any way. I think it was about 1% of the respondents in this survey were under 18. And I think just as we look ahead to the future, we want to get input from young people, and they really are the future of our communities. So I wondered, I was looking at the UPWP and some of the carryover funds for public participation, and I wondered whether there could be an additional element added specifically to do some outreach to people under 18, maybe like a 13 to 18 or 15 to 18-year-old targeted outreach effort.
We can certainly look into that because most of our subject matter topics tend to be around commuting, infrastructure. There is, even though our surveys are not really targeting any particular age group, it is open to everybody. There probably is some constraints that we are not getting them to respond. I don't know to what extent there is a level of engagement and awareness of these issues, but we certainly can look at, is there any other ways of targeting that age group? Given their age itself, there might be some issues of directly reaching out to them as well. So we will look into that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be valuable to have those perspectives. And as you said, it might need a little additional tailoring since they, might not be doing teleworking, for example, but maybe kind of tailored a little bit and be able to get their perspective for now and looking into the future. Since we know with some of the younger generations, there is less use of cars and more focus on wanting to live closer to work and some of those initiatives. So I'd love to see that. Thank you.
And hopefully we are catching the younger cohort who are actually working and getting their input. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else from Maryland? Virginia? WMATA and other agencies? Okay. Great. Thank you, Conti. Appreciate your report. I have just a couple of items, mostly administrative. First, we are scheduled to meet in person next month, which will mark the second anniversary of when the board went all virtual due to necessity. And so this has been two consecutive years of virtual meetings today marked that. So now meeting in person is the plan and the hope. Staff will monitor the situation, and if conditions warrant, we will revert to virtual meeting format instead of staff. Advises me that the plan is of now for a hybrid in-person meeting, meaning it will be mostly in person with members who notify staff ahead of time participating virtually. Given the limited space in the room and the desire to provide some amount of social distancing, as we return to in-person settings, the plan also, as of now, is for limiting the number of people in the room, meaning it will be limited to board members or the alternates participating in the meeting and staff whose work activities are on the agenda. There will be no room for other member agency staffs, members of the public, or others. Hopefully, as time progresses and the situation improves, we will be able to accommodate more people in the room. But be on the lookout for more information on the logistics of the meeting and the invite that will come from Conti. Second, I apologize that I was unable to conclude the meeting and discussion by 2 p.m. last month. I know members have tight schedules, and I do not want to put any member in a position where they will have to leave the meeting before discussions can conclude. I've asked staff to make sure they include all relevant background information and memos for the agenda items so that we have time to read them ahead of time and staff would not need to review them in as much detail during the presentations. This way, we can use the time on the agenda more efficiently. I also encourage members to use the chat feature to provide their comments and questions. If we are short on time, staff will follow up with the responses to all comments and questions via a follow-up email that will come to actually all of us. I will try my best to get through all the agenda items and to conclude the meeting on time in order to respect everyone's time. And with that, let's get on to the action item for today, selecting projects in Virginia to receive federal transportation alternative program funds. Our staff, John Swanson, is going to brief us. John had provided us with a detailed memo on the background on this program and the selection process. John will now recap the projects and present us the recommendations of the selection committee. After John's briefing, I'll be looking for a motion to adopt resolution R9-2022. John, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is always a pleasure to talk about the Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program. The TPB is a planning body, and you usually don't get to fund projects directly, but this is one of those unusual opportunities for you all to allocate money to get projects built and implemented. And in a few minutes, I'm going to share with you some information about projects. You're going to be asked to approve more than $7 million today for 8 great little projects to build sidewalks and trails and crosswalks in Virginia. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the background slides, and instead I'm going to focus on the projects, but I think it would be helpful to give you a little context up front. I was in briefing and preparing this presentation, I was thinking recently about the U.S. DOT Secretary Ray LaHood, who was asked when this program was established about a decade ago, why are you doing this? Why are you focusing on biking and walking? And he said, because people want to do it. People want these things. They want to be able to walk. They want to be able to bike. They don't want to have to be dependent on their car for every little trip. And that's why we're doing it too. When we did our outreach, the Voices of the Region outreach that Ms. Kostyk was referring to a minute ago and Conti was describing, people told us in many different ways with a lot of sort of deep feeling that they really value the opportunities that this region provides for walking and biking, and they want more of it. So that's what you are going to have a chance to do. And this action today is to fund these kinds of projects. You have the chance to implement policies that we care about as a region, such as improving PEDS access, safety for vulnerable populations, and access to economic opportunities. And as the name says, this program is all about transportation alternatives. And those alternatives help to build strong communities and reduce our carbon footprint. So some really quickly, the details about the program and project selection, that's all in the memo. I'll just remind you that this program is a federal program, and as a large MPO, the TPB is responsible for selecting projects using funding that is sub-allocated in each of our 3 states. So everything we do is always 3 times more complicated in this region. And for Virginia, we do this every 2 years. So the last time you heard from me was 2 years ago. Virginia has 3 pots of money, essentially, for the TAP funding, the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside funding. As a large MPO, I already mentioned we have a set-aside. This year, it's about $7 million. But in addition, each of the district members of the Commonwealth Transportation Board is responsible for selecting projects for about $2 million each. So we've been working very closely with CTB District Member Mary Hines, which has been an absolute pleasure, as always. And at the end of the process, there's a statewide pot of funding. And so the projects that are not being funded today, the applications that are not being funded today will be considered for that statewide funding. So if we could just, that's my intro. Can we just skip some slides to keep it moving to slide 8? You can all look at this on your own. This is sort of the overview of this year. 24 applications, so it's super competitive, you know, as it was a couple of years ago. So this is not unusual for Virginia. A lot of need, a lot of interest. We had over $7 million. We're actually recommending funding for a little more than our allocation, but we've been working with VDOT and have been assured that the overage will be covered by some of our unspent balance from previous years. And again, CDB member Mary Hines selected 4 projects. They're listed in the memo. And we really sort of did this very collaboratively. We sort of jointly said with Ms. Hines, you know, we have about $9 million. You know, what are the projects we want to fund? And basically we're super supportive of the projects that she has selected. And a couple of them we're funding jointly, just to make sure we can use up our allocation. So next slide, please. Here's a list of projects. This is I think it's an impressive list. It's got a good regional allocation, a lot of representation in the outer jurisdictions where obviously the needs for this kind of work is extensive. The projects are going to serve many of the TPB's regional priorities, which we talk about a lot around here. I think one of the big stories this year is that the majority of these projects, 5 of them, are going to be providing connections to the National Capital Trail Network. That is that awesome connection, which would go from the Pennsylvania border down to Prince William and Charles County. And it's 1,400 miles when it's completely built. And these projects are really going to be contributing to the build out of that network. But 4 of the projects are in regional activity centers, and 4 of them are in equity emphasis areas. So we're really seeing a lot of regional priorities being met. I want to note that all the projects are fully funded for construction, according to what we see in our applications. Many of the projects, the approved funding also includes design, sort of earlier stages in project development and preliminary engineering, as well as right-of-way and utility acquisition. Next slide. I'm just going to describe these projects very briefly. Again, you can read about them in the memo. This first one I think is a great one to start out with. This is very exciting to us, serves a variety of regional priorities, could be kind of a poster child for the kind of thing that we want to fund here. The Vienna Metro bike and pedestrian improvements. It's going to provide ped bike connectivity to the Vienna Metro rail station. Again, a very important thing for us, connection to transit. It's in the National Capital Trail Network. It's an actual link in that network, not just connection to, but an actual piece of the network. And it's in the heart of a regional activity and an equity emphasis area. So we're very pleased. We've funded this one in the past, and we're going to be funding, hopefully, this was the final portion of this will represent the completion of this project. So next slide. Sterling Boulevard Sidewalks in Loudoun County. This is another project that is connected to the National Capital Trail Network, providing a direct connection to the Wnod trail, which is you know, one of our treasures in this region, a key artery in the National Capital Trail Network. The project is in a regional activity center and equity emphasis area, and the panel was very impressed by the kind of the specificity of this project and how it's sort of, you know, it seems like it's very, very doable, and we'll be funding this jointly with Ms. Hines. Next slide, please. It's a bit of a broken record. This one's also providing connection to the Wnod trail. It's a Safe Routes to School project, however, which is kind of unique. I mean, we're helping kids with this project access this trail system, which is just awesome. It's in a regional activity center, and it's going to be serving an equity emphasis area. It's on the edge of an equity service emphasis area, and it's going to be serving children in that community, which is super important as well. This is making improvements around this school that is going to really make it much easier to walk and bike, which is a key part of this program. Next slide. In Leesburg, the Plaza Street Sidewalk, providing pedestrian linkage to residential communities and shopping, restaurants, employment centers in downtown Leesburg. Also providing enhanced safety school safety. The project is in an equity emphasis area, and it's in the Leesburg Activity Center. Next slide. This project in the city of Fairfax is really kind of impressively building on a lot of past planning work. There's been a lot of work underway already at University Drive to a road diet there and small area plan, and this is really going to be building on that. And the committee was very impressed by the kind of the practical nature of this. It seems really ready to go and multifaceted. Again, increasing the connectivity in the heart of one of our regional activity centers. Next slide. We had a lot of applications from Prince William County. There's obviously a lot of need out there. This one rose to the surface really in terms of our evaluation. The Old Carolina Road sidewalk improvements is going to be really connecting some communities, that's really providing a connection over I-66 at Walter Robinson Lane, connecting the on the north side Hospital and Park and Ride, and the south side the whole old Haymarket Main Street, and some new commercial development that's going on out there. Some challenges related to this project, but an important one, so we're happy to be funding it. Next slide. Token Forest. I was thinking that that picture could be like a a poster for bad for the lack of sidewalks. The sidewalk just ends at this location, and this project, which is somewhat less expensive actually than some of the others, and pretty focused and limited, is going to be providing access from a housing community to a church, grocery store, commercial area, at the Holy Marketplace retail area. So this is something that's very sort of practical and achievable, and VDOT felt like it was definitely ready to go. Next slide. The last one, which we're funding again partially in coordination with Ms. Hines, is in Clifton, town of Clifton, a charming, quaint community that's been doing a lot of work to improve its walkability. And this project has already gone through preliminary engineering design and is really moving toward construction at this point. It's going to be providing sidewalks, crosswalks, signage, landscaping, and lighting to a stretch of Main Street and it's going to be making this area compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this will be finalizing and sort of completing a lot of previous work that's been done in this location. So that is, next slide. That concludes my presentation. We're asking you all to approve resolution 9/2022. Before I close, let me just give some thanks to the folks at VDOT. Again, wonderful to work with Carol Bondurant and Heidi Mitter and Maria Sinner, as well as Pam Liston, and also the members of our selection panel, which included some staff here, Janie Nam and Nicole McCall, as well as partners at MDOT and VDOT, Kelsey Bridges and Christy Bernal. And finally, our new TLC intern, Joe Limber, who's been super helpful in this process. We're going to be, from Maryland and DC, the TAP application period is going to open up in April, so be on the lookout for that. We're going to be doing something very similar, approving projects anticipated in July. And then finally, Conti already mentioned this, but I'll just squeeze in this little announcement. TLC application deadline is next Tuesday, so get your applications in if you haven't already. And with that, thank you.
Well, thank you, John. I will go ahead and move adoption of R9/2022. Pam Sebesky, Miss City of Manassas. Is there a second?
Second, Jeanette Rischel, Manassas Park.
Great, thank you. So are there any questions for John? We'll start with the District of Columbia. Okay, Maryland. Virginia.
Madam Chair. Question.
Yes, please go ahead. Looking for hands.
Just out of curiosity, are there any surveillance cameras on any part of the trail system for safety reasons, particularly those near the schools?
I don't know that, and perhaps some of our VDOT partners can answer that, or maybe some other people from the region, but I don't have any idea about that. we can get back to you as well.
Thank you. I would appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mary Rachel, do you have any other questions?
Madam
If not,
Chair.
I see a hand from Patrick.
Yeah, thank you. Patrick Wine from College Park. So this is great news. I'm glad to see that that there's a great level of engagement from Virginia. I'm wondering, given that last year in Maryland, our process did not, we didn't even use a full allocation of funds for the state. I'm wondering if there are any lessons learned and anything that we can apply to the other jurisdictions in terms of really increasing participation and engagement from local jurisdictions in getting these funds spent on high quality projects.
That's a great question. And we do bring, as I mentioned, the MDOT and DDOT staff who work on the TAP programs into the selection process so they can sort of, everybody can learn from each other. We learn from all of them. There's some of these things are sort of beyond our control and possibly beyond sort of MDOT or DDOT's control. I think one of the things that does happen in Virginia, which is super helpful, is the application period is actually pretty extensive. They have a pre-application period where they vet projects and sort of work closely with the jurisdiction. So that's something that, you know, that's hard to do, and it's not sort of our role to sort of say how this should be done. The other thing I think that which is nice for Virginia is it is a 2-year process. And that means that there's sort of double the money, but we can also sort of fund more things. And it sort of helps us overcome restrictions on partial funding, which Maryland has. So that's another factor, which is, you know, helpful with the Virginia process for sure.
Thank you, John. It's helpful to hear those differences. Kristen Olmsted from Loudoun.
Yes, ma'am. John, I really want to thank you for the 2 Loudoun projects, the Plaza Street project in Leesburg and the Sterling Sidewalk project. I'm very familiar with these 2 communities. They certainly do qualify for areas that could use additional support. And I think this is going to make a huge difference for the residents and their ability to access bus lines and get to grocery stores and doctors. So I really appreciate TPB's support in this, and thank you, John, especially.
Thank you. Great projects.
Great, thanks. And I don't see any other hands up, so Wnod or other agencies.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Conti.
I just want to acknowledge Mr. Carantonis's comment in the chat where he was pointing out to, since these are federal funds, when a locality receives these federal funds and puts it on a project, the project becomes open to federal compliance, oversight, and review. That adds additional administrative responsibilities to a local jurisdiction. So I was generally making that observation. So I just wanted to acknowledge that is one of the things with federal funds. It's not the amount that a project receives. Even a single dollar will require you to comply with the full host of federal responsibilities. So maybe VDOT might be able to advise their localities who might be holding back applying for these funds on any ideas or strategies where those responsibilities can be met. You know, maybe relatively, I don't know if we can wish those responsibilities away unless the federal government takes some action, but just wanted to acknowledge that. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm just trying to encourage some thinking about that. It's an equity issue, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for your comments and you know, putting them in the chat like I requested. So that's great. Okay, so I think we're ready to move on for the vote. Remember, just nays and abstentions only. We'll start with the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, WMATA or other agencies. Okay, sounds like a unanimous approval. Thank you, everyone, for the good discussion. We're going to move on to our information items now. Our staff, Lynn Erickson, have provided the draft of the TPB's budget document for next fiscal year. Lynn will briefly review the budget and work activities. There's no action needed on this today, so please provide staff with your comments and questions after this meeting or in the chat. We can certainly take a few questions or comments today following Lynn's briefing. We will be asked to approve and adopt our budget next month. Lynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Sebeski. So next slide, please, Leo. All right, so I hope you all learned a little something new from last month's UPWP presentation. I provided some tidbits on the process itself, how to best navigate it, and I described our annual activities that staff conducts. This month, we are asking you to take a look at the actual document, and I'm going to walk you through how to read the heart of our budget and also describe some discrete activities and projects that staff will be engaged in next year. The board will be asked to approve our UPWP next month. Next slide, please, Leo. Okay, so the UPWP is a document that demonstrates how we carry out the MPO activities. It serves as the TPB staff work scope for the upcoming fiscal year. So please sit tight as I explain something that is super complicated but necessary for you to understand. The board is, after all, going to be asked to approve an $18.9 million budget. So I'm talking about the federal funding that is specifically allocated to the Metropolitan Transportation Planning process, Federal Highway Administration PL, and Federal Transit Administration Section 5303 funding. So keep in mind that MPOs do not compete for federal funding. We are allocated a specific amount through the federal authorization bills, so we know what's available to us. We don't invoice the federal government directly. Our 3 state DOTs are the direct recipients, and this means that they have a special role in our process. So besides having to pay more than the other TPB members, and the rest of you pay your 10% match through your local COG dues, the state DOTs are a partner and technically are federally responsible to oversee our federal process. Okay, so now on to the budget. So I would argue that the 3 most important pages of our UPWP document are tables 1, 2, and 3, which are located on pages 33, 34, and 35, or if you're looking at the PDF, it's pages 37 to 39. These are revenue and expenditure summary tables. So Leo, if you could bring up table 1, please. Yeah, so this is on page 33 of our document. So keep in mind, unlike what we just talked about with the TAP, the PL and the 5303 funding comes only to us, and the key here is we can spend it in whatever year we want to spend it in. It doesn't go away. So our revenue totals are combined from 3 pots or buckets, if you will. It's a combination of old money and new money. So you can see this described in the left column. First, we have our new federal money, which we've identified as fiscal 2023. Second, we have the old money that was allocated to us, but we didn't spend it. So this is also, we call it prior unexpended. It's actually from the 2021 UPWP. And the third pot is money that we don't plan to spend by the end of this current fiscal year, which we call carryover funding. Carryover is essentially choice funding. We can choose to roll it over immediately into the next fiscal year, like if we have something that we want to do like right now, or we can wait 2 years to have access to it and then spend it. So I'll talk about it a little later, but you all should take a look at the carryover memo that we also posted on our meeting materials page for the exact details of the activities we plan to carry over. Add all of that up, and we have about $18.9 million to work with in fiscal 2023. So Leo, if you could go to table 2 on page 34, that's just the next page. Thanks. So I'll go into detail on the actual work a little bit later in our presentation, but this is the framework for how all of our work is organized in the document. Our 10 core activities support the region as a whole and are structured to follow our federal requirements, starting with the plan. All things revolve around our plan, right? In this table, we identify each major work activity or category and how much we expect to spend to complete the tasks identified with those activities, all of which are detailed in the text in the draft document, and you've already seen all those details in the 19-page outline I shared with you in January. So Leo, if you could go to the next page, table 3. This is actually a more detailed accounting explanation of table 2, and it breaks down the budget into those categories that our funding agencies need to track and report our spending. Okay, Leo, if you could go back to the slide presentation to slide 4. Thank you. All right, good. All right, slide 4 is a more succinct summary of table 3, and it demonstrates how that $18.9 million is really broken down. So we have about $6 million for staff salaries, $3.3 million for programs and studies, like our regional roadway safety program and our TLC program. So as far as where we are in confirming these numbers now, we actually haven't heard much from the states yet, but that's normal, either from the unexpended bucket or the new bucket. So we proceed like we do every year and assume that we'll be allocated basically the same amount of funding as last year. So as I mentioned last month, we know that there will be an increase of funding provided to Mpos from the new federal authorization called the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, but we likely won't see that this fiscal 2023. We'll kind of have to wait and see. Through our master funding agreement with our funding partners, we are obligated to approve our UPWP in March. So we really can't anticipate learning more about the new money until after that happens. So we anticipate that we'll be reflecting it next year. So we're going to continue to work with the states to hammer out the revenue details. And while we're waiting for confirmation on some of the buckets that I mentioned, we really think that any changes that will happen between now and March will be minimal. Next slide, please. Okay, on to our stuff, our activities. So one general observation for this year is that typically, once we approve the plan, usually we have time to catch up on all the other federally required tasks. But this year, we're going to just jump right into the next update. So I really feel like there are fewer new activities to talk about. We do try really hard to synchronize board interests with our federal requirements. So in January, I provided details on the annual recurring activities, but now I'm going to highlight the specific tasks we plan to do this upcoming fiscal year. I do want to remind all of you of the importance of our subject matter expert advisory committees and subcommittees, since all of these activities that I will be describing will come to you after they go through the committees. This is where we get great feedback on and develop consensus for all of our work. All right, so here we go. So maybe it's just me, we are looking forward to our federal certification review, which occurs every 4 years after the plan is submitted to our federal partners. This is a super intense exercise where USDOT scrutinizes all aspects of the work that the MPO does to ensure that all federal rules and regulations are being followed. You will all be partners in that process. Many of the activities we are planning to do will serve to enhance our plan development. So as you know, TPB is scheduled to approve the update to Visualize 2045 in just a few months in June this fiscal year. But in 2023, staff will begin the new plan update, including a call for projects. We will also conduct our environmental justice analysis, and we will also update our equity emphasis areas. There are many related planning activities and studies that will be reflected in that next update starting next year. A key activity in 2023 will be an update of the TPB's Regional Freight Plan, the first such update since 2016. As you can imagine, our Freight Subcommittee will play a pivotal role in the development of that plan. Our National Capital Trail Network Map, which you first approved in 2020, will receive its annual update, which hopefully will reflect progress by you, our member agencies, towards completing the network. Our Bicycle and Pedestrian Subcommittee will help lead that effort. Following the TPB's Climate Change Mitigation Study of 2021, this year we hope to focus on implementation of that set of strategies that will result in reductions in on-road transportation sector greenhouse gas emissions in an effort to attain COG's regional greenhouse gas reduction targets. Also, following the TPB Resiliency Study and inventory of member resiliency and adaptation planning activities, which we published back in November, and we're going to be hosting upcoming transportation resiliency planning webinar series. Staff will then further conduct coordination and research activities based on the findings of that 2021 study. Next slide, please. So we will be conducting a thorough review of our public participation activities. Additional enhancements address planning elements that are also components of Visualize 2045, including addressing federal performance-based planning and programming requirements, featuring data analysis that supports target setting. As part of our regional land use and transportation planning coordination program, staff will continue to examine the relationship and implications of regional land use and transportation actions and continue to develop the cooperative forecasts. This includes supporting the final approval of the Round 9.2 cooperative forecasts and developing the next major round of forecasts, which is called Round 10. Next slide, please. TPB supports multimodal initiatives. We will update the region's Human Service Transportation Coordination Plan, led by our Access for All Committee. We will be hoping that your applications to our TAP and TLC programs will reflect needs that the TPB identified in our list of transit access focus areas that the TPB approved. We are also happy that the Regional Roadway Safety Program, recently established in 2021, we're happy that it's thriving as well, generating significant interest and great project proposals from our jurisdictions. Next slide, please. All right, this slide shows additional highlights. So we're going to be running another Community Leadership Institute session where we hope to turn out another 20 regional transportation graduates into the DMV. Staff will continue to conduct important research and analysis of regional travel trends through its transportation research and data programs. These activities will include deep dive analysis of travel surveys, including the Regional Travel Survey, the Visualize 2045 Public Opinion Survey, and the Employer Survey, among others, to understand and describe how regional travel has changed, resulting from disruptions such as COVID-19. Staff will also continue developing a travel trends dashboard of key travel data and information and conduct travel monitoring studies and updates. As part of its data programs, staff will also continue to conduct narrative management, maintain our geographic information system, and produce visualizations of TPB's information, products, and plans. In the area of travel forecasting and mobile emissions planning, TPB staff will use and support its two production use travel models, the Gen 2 version 2.3 model and the Gen 2 version 2.4 model. Now, I joked with Tech Committee that I struggle reading some of this stuff. We have three right now. And what's really exciting is that the production use version of the latest one, which is the activity-based model called Gen 3, and I know you guys aren't going to remember anything I said, but it's expected to be ready by late fiscal 2023. And why that's so exciting is because we're coming towards the end of a 7-year process to get to that. So it's super exciting. Sorry, I get excited about funny things. All right, lastly, the TPB staff will develop modal emissions inventories and new emissions budgets related to our state implementation plans, or SIPs, to meet the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standards, including development of an attainment and maintenance SIP. Staff will continue to support our local, state, and regional DOTs and transit partners through the Technical Assistance Program, which assists our partners with preliminary planning of projects, programs, or policy evaluations that advance metropolitan transportation planning. All right, last slide, please, Leo. Okay, so our next steps are to continue to refine the estimates and adjust our budget accordingly, and we'll come back to you next month with the final document for approval. We will also be finalizing which activities will not be accomplished this current fiscal year and to take steps to roll them over into the new 2023 UPWP, which I mentioned, we call that carryover funding. We've already identified that, and if you just take a quick look at the memo that is posted, that's our proposal. So those carryover activities have already been put into the 2023 document. So if all you do is just look at the 2023 document, that'll be great. Please provide your comments on anything to me by next Friday, February 25th, so we can address them in time for our March mail-out cycle. So just a reminder, most of this information has been posted for review as a bulleted list since December. So again, if you have any questions, just let me know. In March, we're going to be asking the board to take 3 actions. So the first is to amend the current UPWP to pull out those projects, to remove that carryover. The second is to actually carry that funding over into the 2023 UPWP. And the third, and probably most important action, is to approve the 2023 UPWP. So after we approve it in March, we'll submit it to our federal partners and work begins on July 1st. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, Lynn, you went through that pretty fast. Thank you. Any questions for Lynn from the District of Columbia? How about Maryland?
I have a question. Rodney Roberts from Greenbelt.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Rodney.
How y'all doing today?
Good. How are you?
Long time no see. Anyway, I saw on the news this morning that NOAA has come out with a report that is saying that sea level rise will be 12 inches by 2050. That's a huge increase. They say that the magnitude of the melting is increasing, ever increasing, and way more than they ever thought would be possible. So I'm wondering, how is that going to affect your thinking on the entire, the thought of resiliency and all your other planning for climate change? Because it seems to me that we're way behind, that what we're doing is way too little, way too late. And, so do you have any thoughts of revamping your thinking on that whole issue?
So I have two thoughts, and I'm going to go first, then hand it over to Conti. The way that we produce the document and write it in is flexible enough where we can pivot to some degree depending upon staff availability and those sorts of things. I will say that we added a whole new section on resiliency, and as I had just mentioned, we did a lot of work towards the end of calendar 2021 on resiliency, and we'll be carrying that forward. Conti, do you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Roberts. Just general disclosure that the federal metropolitan planning regulations does require organizations such as TPB to look at resiliency at a regional level. The USDOT has its own specific definition for what is resiliency to be defined as for Mpos work activities such as the TPB. So that is part of our work program that we have proposed for next year. In fact, even in this current fiscal year, we hired a consultant to get us started in understanding what level of work activities are being done by our member jurisdictions. Because the TPB is neither a maintenance organization or a construction organization or an operating entity, we do not directly oversee any of the infrastructure. That said, at the state level, there is a lot of work happening on exactly the kind of questions, Mr. Roberts, you were asking about. For example, recently, the Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, funded a coastal threat for infrastructure study that is currently ongoing. It's going on in Virginia. They offered other Maryland and DC to participate in it, but they did not because there were other activities going on. So we have already reached out. We are starting with an inventory of who is doing what so that we can understand what resiliency planning work is underway, and then determine what is the best way that an organization such as TPB can assist in that. So that is this second phase of work. In the current fiscal year, we did the survey, we hired the consultant to advise us, and that work will continue on into the next year. But you're absolutely on point that the frequency and the severity of severe weather events, whether it is flooding, rain, or heat, are all increasing, and being a resilient, ready region is going to require us to start paying more attention to that, as opposed to how can we stop something from happening, because these are already happening. How do we adapt to what is already happening?
Yeah, that's good, but I think that we really do need to look beyond the resiliency and start thinking about the true cost of our transportation system, especially our highways and the millions of cars that we have. If we don't curb that, we're doomed. Thank you. Sorry about that. Sorry to bug you. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Virginia. Wnod or other agencies? Okay. Thank you, Lynn. So next, our staff, Nicholas Ramos, had provided the draft of the Commuter Connection Program's budget document for next fiscal year. The TPB oversees this program that is funded by the 3 state departments of transportation. Nick will briefly review the budget and work activities. There's no action needed on this, so please provide staff with your comments and questions after this meeting or in the chat. We can certainly take a few questions or comments today following the briefing. We will be asked to approve and adopt our budget next month. Nick, please take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In your agenda packet today, there is a draft FY 2023 Commuter Connections work program, and I will be outlining some of the aspects of that program today. So we can go to the next slide. There is a companion document, which is a strategic plan that is adopted by Commuter Connections each year. And the definition in that plan on Commuter Connections is that it's a network of private and public transportation organization that includes COG, our state funding agencies, local organizations that basically work together to assist and encourage commuters in the region to use alternatives to the single occupant vehicle. Next slide. There are many benefits to Commuter Connections that we document, including benefits for jurisdictions, employers, and workers. It helps reduce and manage congestion. It helps reduce emissions. We also help, the program helps support local efforts to attract and retain employers. For employers, it helps with recruitment and retention. And for the workers, it provides more mobility options as well as reducing the stress, cost, and time of commuting. And hopefully that'll lead to an improved quality of life for everyone. Next slide. This is a map of our coverage area for many of our programs. So if you look at the middle region and it's outlined by a dark line, that's our 8-hour non-attainment region. And that's the region where if commuters are coming into work in that area, they qualify for many of the programs. However, our program coverage area is much larger, so the dark yellow area is all of our service area for the Guaranteed Ride Home program, and then the lighter yellow area is our rideshare commuter shed, and these are locations where we have commuters that are registered for our program services, and that's in DC, Maryland, Virginia, parts of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, the Eastern Shore, as well as Delaware. We even have some commuters who come down from New Jersey into the Baltimore area. Okay, next slide, please. This is the latest ranking of carpool and transit use, and this is from what we did here is we looked at the comparable areas and the total number of workers. And so when you look at this, it's from the U.S. Census Bureau. And essentially what it shows is that the DC metro area is in the realm when it comes to the percentage of carpoolers as well as transit users. And we're in the top 10, certainly in the top 5 for transit. So I think we're very fortunate in this region because we do have a lot of infrastructure that supports carpooling and transit, and that speaks to the ability for us to be able to offer many of these mobility options to our commuters. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we do a very robust analysis of the program, and based on the most recent analysis, the program is able to reduce about 156,000 vehicle trips per day, about 3 million vehicle miles of travel, a little over half a ton of NOx, and about a half a ton of VOC. Next slide. We also play a role in the regional planning process, and in particular, the congestion management process, which includes a very robust TDM component. Commuter Connections constitutes the major demand management component of that CMP. And we continue to work with our colleagues here to update that information as needed. Next slide. We also support regional air quality goals, as well as part of the update of the region's long-range plan and the TIP. And results also may help contribute to the performance measures and goals that are set by the region under the FAST Act requirements. And we're also a part of Visualize 2045 and the TPB's endorsed aspirational initiatives. Next slide. When we look at the cost of commuter connections, we do a cost effectiveness analysis, and we're spending about 15 cents for every trip reduced, about a penny for every vehicle mile of travel reduced, about $30,000 per ton of NOx reduced, and about $43,000 per ton of VOC reduced. Next slide. There's also some additional societal benefit costs. I already reviewed the air quality benefits. There's also noise pollution benefits, hours of delay reduced benefits, as well as gallons of gasoline or fuel that's saved, as well as accidents that can be avoided. So we basically add all of this up as part of our analysis. And when we look at it, it's about 1.2 million total daily cost savings as a result of the program. Next slide. These are all of the program elements that are part of the work program for FY 2023. So we have the Operations Center, Guaranteed Ride Home, our mass marketing initiative that Conti spoke about earlier, program evaluation. We do have an employer outreach initiative, as well as a Guaranteed Ride Home program in the Baltimore region. Our budget is going to be pretty much flat going from FY 22 to FY 2023. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that about 30% of the cost goes to our staff and overhead. A little over half goes to private sector services. About 8% is passed through to the local jurisdictions, and about 12% constitutes direct costs. Okay, next slide. So now for what's new in the FY 2023 CCWP. We teamed up with the Maryland Department of Transportation to expand the Incent Trip program through a grant that we received from the Federal Highway Administration. So we are going to be working with them to promote that program in other parts of Maryland, which is outside of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. We also have many activities associated with our monitoring and evaluation program, which includes finalizing our technical report for the 2022 State of the Commute Survey, as well as preparing a general public report, which will be printed the following fiscal year. We'll also complete the Guaranteed Ride Home survey applicants reports, as well as a Bike to Work Day participant survey report, and also analyzing our employer outreach database, and then doing a Maryland employer telework data collection survey, and then also surveying our Car Free Day and Pull Rewards participants. That'll all culminate into a draft TDM analysis report, which will encompass the 3-year data cycle period, which is 2021 through 2023. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, just to kind of give you a little bit of a recap, the state funding agencies provided initial comments and edits on the draft FY 2023 CCWP. Commuter Connections reviewed that back in November. We established a comment period through early December. Then we went back to our state funding agencies and reviewed the changes with them after they had submitted the comments. And then we went to them in January, and they reviewed the final version and endorsed it for release. Next slide. We did brief the tech committee earlier this month. We're basically presenting this information to you today, and we'll be back next month for a final review and approval. And again, we'll be going to the tech committee in March as well. So if we have to make any tip adjustments, if necessary, those will happen in June, and then the program will begin on July 1st. Any questions? The other thing I will say also is we did add language in the work program is that based on the COVID-19 pandemic, which, you know, as Chair Sebeski mentioned at the very beginning, started about 2 years ago. It's really had a profound impact on the use of commuter program services in the region, as many of you know. And so we're going to continue to monitor these programs and services. And, we've worked with our state funding agencies, and we'll make any changes needed to address the demand for those services. And, a lot of the impacts are really going to depend on return to work results and the continued level of teleworking by workers in the region. So we added that language right up front in the work program, just so that folks are aware that we're keeping a close eye on this. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nick. It's an important thing that we do. So let's start with questions from Maryland. How about Virginia? WMATA or other agencies? All right. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up is our staff, Eric Randall. We had received a memo in the draft set of targets for transit asset management. This is one of the specific set of targets that the TPB adopts as per federal requirements. There are a set of draft targets and there is no action needed on this today. So please provide staff with your comments or questions after this meeting or in the chat. We can certainly take a few questions or comments today following the briefing. We will be asked to approve and adopt these targets next month. Eric, please take it away.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Hope you can hear me as well. All right. Thank you, members of the board. I'm here today to talk about the 2022 regional targets for transit asset management, or TAM. These are part of the federal requirements for performance-based planning and programming required of Mpos like the TPB. Next slide, please. So I'll speak to the federal requirements for setting TAM targets, review the 4 TAM performance measures, present a summary table for agencies, which is the most sense conceptually of the 2022 targets that agencies have established, and then show our proposed or draft targets for the region for 2022. I'll say up front, this is very dry stuff. I will point out that currently Metro has its 2023 operating and capital budgets out for public comment. The capital budget proposed for next year is $2.3 billion. In addition to the money that flows to Metro, local jurisdictions spend millions, occasionally tens of millions of dollars annually on maintaining transit assets and keeping them in a state of good repair. So a large amount of funding in this region goes every year towards transit asset management. So just keep that in mind as you listen to me go through these rather dry targets. Next slide, please. So, Leo, can you fix the slide maybe there a bit? So the transit asset management federal setting requirements apply to providers of public transportation, in other words, transit agencies, and they're required to annually establish TAM performance targets. These requirements apply to any transit agency or provider receiving federal funds from the Federal Transit Administration, either directly as a recipient or as a subrecipient for funding that often flows through the state. Large agencies set targets and report directly to the FTA. Small agencies may participate in group plans. In actual practice, both Maryland Transit Administration and Virginia, the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, run group plans for these smaller agencies in each state. And those two agencies have effectively made these requirements part of their state requirements. So in practice, essentially every transit provider, both regular fixed route transit and paratransit provider, as well as some other specialized transit services, do fulfill these federal requirements and are incorporated into the targets and data that you will see later. Moving on to Mpos, like the TPB, we are required to set transit asset targets for a metropolitan planning area. And this is part of our federal metropolitan statewide planning regulations. The FTA recommendation is for Mpos to set a single regional target for each performance measure asset class. That's a bit of a mouthful, but an individual asset class is a type of transit vehicle, often a standard transit bus. A separate asset class would be an articulated bus. Another asset class is a commuter bus. Another asset class is a streetcar vehicle. So we have to set a single target for each of them, which means we have to combine all the information from the region to come up with these targets. We do not submit these targets to the FTA, though we do pass copies to the states, but we are required to include these targets in our long-range transportation plan TIP. And next year, when the FTA comes and reviews how we do planning here at the MPO, they will be looking at the PBP process, including these transit asset management requirements. Next slide, please. So here are the 4 TAM performance measures. I'll try to describe them briefly. Again, there's a longer report and cover memo included in the mail-out documents for today. The basic performance measure is for rolling stock for revenue vehicles that serve customers. The performance measure is the percentage of vehicles that meet or exceed a useful life benchmark. To translate that, a typical useful life for a transit bus is about 14 years. So a transit agency is operating a number of buses, and some of those buses are probably at the end of their life. They may be 13 years, so they're within useful life. They may be 14 years. They may be 15 years or older, in which case they would have exceeded their useful life. The buses may be perfectly operable. The performance measure does not speak much detail to whether they're in good repair, but simply this measures whether they've exceeded their typical useful life. So across the region, some percentage of revenue vehicles have exceeded their useful life. The second performance measure applies to the non-revenue vehicles, tow trucks, cranes, prime movers, the automobiles that many agencies have for carrying out administrative requirements. Again, the percentage of vehicles that have met or exceeded their useful life. The third performance measure is specific to rail systems, which specifically in this region is Metro Rail and DC streetcar. It's the percentage of track segments, signaler systems that have performance restrictions. In other words, the equipment cannot be operated at 100% or for normal operations of the system. There's always work being done on segments that can lead to performance restrictions. So again, some percentage of track segments will have performance restrictions over the course of a year and is captured in this performance measure. Lastly, agencies are required to evaluate their facilities through an exhaustive checklist called the TERM process. It's a 1 to 5 scale, ranging from 5 excellent to an overall rating of 1, which means the equipment is poor, or 2 marginal condition. So any facilities that rate marginal or poor, 1 or 2 on the TERM scale, are considered to have met or exceeded their target. This applies to all sorts of stations and facilities across the region for transit. So I hope that was understandable, very quick. Again, the report has more detail. Next slide, please. So here's the summary of targets by agency. So again, looking at the left side, we have 7 Tier 1 larger transit operators in this region: Metro, District DOT, because they operate rail, Fairfax, Montgomery, Prince George's County, PRTC, and VRE for rail systems. And then the smaller systems are captured in the 2 state plans, the MTA's plan or PT's Virginia. The 4 performance measures are across the top. Taking an example, Fairfax County, which operates both fixed route bus service as well as a paratransit service, looking at their rolling stock, approximately 10% of their revenue vehicles are expected to, their target is set at 10%, approximately 10% of their vehicles, actual performance will differ slightly from target, but 10% of their vehicles will be at or exceeding their useful life and probably need to be replaced in the near future. Similarly, 10% of service vehicles are at or exceeding useful life. Fairfax County doesn't operate any rail, so no percentage of rail infrastructure has performance restrictions. And their target for station facilities is 0, which means all their facilities or stations are in good condition. You can look at the table for the other agencies. Next slide, please. When we combine this for a region, it becomes a little more difficult. Again, very dry stuff. But here are the assets in our region for revenue vehicles: articulated buses, automobiles, over the road, which are commuter buses, and then regular standard buses. So if I look at regular standard buses, there were 2,616 in the region in regular service at the point that data was reported. Of these buses, 6.9%, which works out to about 130, had met or exceeded their useful life. Again, those buses may be perfectly operable, but they probably need to be replaced pretty soon. Overall, there's just shy of 5,000 revenue vehicles in the region. So that's how many we're operating transit service. Again, several hundred of those have reached their target and probably need to be replaced soon. Next slide, please. Here are the other three performance measures, the service vehicles at the top. And I will note that these percentages are very high for service vehicles. I think a lot of uncertainty associated with the pandemic has led to a lot of service vehicles, automobiles, tow trucks, other vehicles being kept in service. Again, they may be perfectly operable, but the fact is these vehicles are probably aging and need to be replaced pretty soon, needs to be integrated into the transit asset management plans and the capital budgets for transit agencies. Looking at track segments, again, some percentage of heavy rail or streetcar rail mileage in the region has some performance restrictions, usually due to planned maintenance, and so it will not be 100% operable. Commuter rail is 0 because Virginia Railway Express does not own any of the service trackage. They use that of the freight rails. But with the Transforming Rail in Virginia plan and the plans to add rail over the Long Bridge, in future there will be commuter rail trackage. Similarly, in future, there will be Purple Line light rail trackage to be added to the reporting for these transit asset management targets. And then finally, the passenger and maintenance facilities, some 332 of those in the region, including metro rail stations and other rail stations in there, as well as parking facilities. And again, some percentage are rated marginal or poor and need to be improved and brought up into good performance. So next slide, please. I tried to cover that all very quickly. Again, if there are any questions, please feel free to contact me. We'll be taking comments on these targets through February and then bringing them back to the board for approval at your March meeting. Why we're doing this now is that the federal requirement is for Mpos to include these TAM targets in their long-range transportation plans and their TIPs. Again, the agencies have to do this annually. We're required to do it whenever we adopt a long-range plan or TIP. So with the approval of Visualize 2045 and the 23 to 26 TIP coming up later this year, that's why we're bringing these targets to you now so we can include all this information in those documents. And thank you. That concludes my briefing. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Let's start with any questions from Virginia. Okay. How about WMATA or other agencies? Maryland, District of Columbia. Okay. Thank you, Eric. Our last item today is going to be the details for the plan for collecting input from each TPB members on the specific elements on climate change we would want to include in our long-range transportation plan, Visualize 2045, when we adopted in June of this year. We discussed the process we will use during last month's meeting, and it involves a survey of the board members. Conti provided us with a memo that provides the background and describes the process. He also shared a draft of the survey questionnaire. Conte, if you would please brief everyone and review the documents, the importance of the next steps. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the read ahead packet that was mailed contained details on this whole work activity, and those are on pages 2 through 4, which I will not go over, but I'll be happy to answer any questions or clarify. I will provide a brief overview of the process that we'll be using, and also briefly review the questionnaire, which was also in the read ahead packet. So to start, the TPB has made clear now since 2020 that it intends to add climate change considerations to its list of planning priorities. And it wants to do this as part of this year's update to the long-range transportation plan. So that's the focus, that's the task at hand. The long-range transportation plan will be adopted by June, So between now and June, the board has to identify what exactly it wants to add to that plan document. And more importantly, to make sure that these climate change considerations become part of the TPB's planning process, right? Every year moving forward from now on, that will be one of the considerations. There are other planning priorities that the TPB has adopted, going all the way back to 1998. But climate change has not been one of them, and it's not as explicit as TPB wants to do. So certainly it is timely. So last month, the board reviewed, and last year, the TPB's climate change mitigation study that was undertaken and completed was largely intended to help the TPB decide what it wants to include in its long-range plan and long-range planning process. So last month, the board reviewed a memo from the chair and the two vice chairs that outlined two key climate change related elements that has been proposed to be added to the TPB's long-range transportation plan. First, a greenhouse gas reduction goal explicitly for on-road transportation sector. Second, a set of multimodal, multi-pathway strategies that when implemented would reduce on-road greenhouse gas emissions. So as noted in the memo last month, the board wishes to make sure that each member of the board, and there are 44 members on the TPB, that each member, and they each represent either an agency or an entire jurisdiction. So the idea here is the board wants to make sure that each member of the board has both the time to study these two elements and also to provide input on them with regards to which of these the TPB should adopt officially as one of its planning priorities to its regional planning process. So as you are aware, at the board meetings, there are lots of items. There is limited time. Periodically, the TPB holds work sessions, so it can carve out another 60 or 90 minutes. But more importantly, with the desire to make sure that the TPB members have time to consult their colleagues on their governing entities or to consult their own agency staffs on this set of strategies so that there is a completely informed input to the TPB so that when TPB acts on it, it is fully with the support of not just the members who are at the meeting, but the jurisdictions and the agencies represented on the TPB. So in order to do that, there will be a questionnaire that is being proposed to be sent. The members will have about 5 weeks to review, consult, and provide their input. The questionnaires that we will be sending out will be simple, easy to fill out. It will be an online instrument. However, a hard copy of the questionnaire will also be provided so that members can share it with other staffs and colleagues that they would be consulting with. Only filling out the questionnaire will be online, but the entire questionnaire will be available in a handable and a distributable format. So page 4 of the memo lists the schedule that we have proposed for staff to assist the board complete this deliberation and to take action, keeping in mind that by June, all of this needs to be done, because June is when the TPB is scheduled to adopt the new long-range transportation plan, and we have to submit it to the federal authorities by July and have it approved by the end of the year. So pages 6 through 13 of the memo displays the draft questionnaire. Before I provide an overview of the questionnaire, I would like to note that this questionnaire is a draft. We are sharing it with you today so that, and requesting you to review and provide us with your comments. Are there any changes that you would suggest to the questionnaire? Is something there not clear? Are the choices that are offered for the questions not comprehensive enough? So we want your input. You will have time till next Monday to provide us with your input. Once we receive the input from you, we will go back to the drawing board, revise the questionnaire, and then we will prepare the online and we'll send it to you. And when you will receive the survey, how much time you will have, when you would send us the report, all of that is on page 4 of the memo. But I'll be happy to review it again at the end. So now a brief review of the questionnaire. There are 3 parts to the questionnaire. Part A is about the first element, which is the TPB adopting greenhouse gas reduction goals just for the on-road transportation sector. Should we do this? And the proposed goal is reduce the greenhouse gases from the on-road sector by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030 and by 80% below 2005 levels by 2050. So one thing to note about this is our region and many of your jurisdictions have already adopted greenhouse gas reduction goals. That is from all the sectors combined. It is not just for transportation. So these other sectors are the energy sector. It is the built environment that focuses on buildings. The transportation emissions sector has the on-road and the off-road. Off-road transportation sector pertains to aircrafts, ground air and marine recreational vehicles, rail, construction, lawn and garden equipment, those sorts of things. And then there is solid waste, waste water treatment, agriculture. These are all the different sectors. The current goals are for all sectors combined. What is being proposed here is the TPB adopt the same levels of greenhouse gas reductions just for transportation sector. What the TPB, by doing this, we would have a very specific, measurable and goal for just the on-road transportation emissions. And one of the ideas for doing that is the TPB is a regional transportation planning entity. So it can directly take actions and directly influence emission reductions within the on-road transportation sector. So that's the idea. Part B of the survey is intended to get a sense of the TPB members being able to include these goals into their local transportation decision-making process. As you all are aware, the TPB does not adopt the budgets or approve the budgets for any of the transportation agencies, whether it's transit or highway. All of that is done at a local level. That being the case, how can the TPB's long-range transportation plan actually see projects, programs, and policies that will help reduce the on-road transportation greenhouse gas emissions? It can see that when the TPB member agencies are actually able to include the considerations, or if they're already including it, to increase the consideration of climate change in their decision-making process. So in order to get a sense of how our members would be able to do that, that is the questions in part B. Finally, part C is where there are 15 different strategies proposed, each of which was analyzed by the TPB's climate change mitigation study, and they all showed great potential to reduce on-road greenhouse gas emissions. There are 15 different strategies. So members are being asked to review them and to provide their inputs in terms of which of these 15 should the TPB adopting as planning priority right away. Meaning, these are all things we are all doing. We know this works. We are working on it. Let's adopt this. There were a few strategies that perhaps one might see as pushing the envelope, perhaps a little bit at the academic level. Are those ready now to be adopted, or should we explore them a little further? Or perhaps some of these strategies have identified a level of outcome that members may choose to modify. Maybe the level of outcomes listed here is not high enough, or maybe some of them are too high. So these are all the types of input that we are seeking. So it is not just adopting strategies, but adopting it from a position of knowing what exactly it is we are to be doing, what exact outcomes should we be anticipating and working towards. So I'll close my overview by noting that on page 5 is the schedule of how this survey questionnaire and the TPB's action will actually be integrated into the long-range transportation plan that will be submitted to the federal entities in July. That's on page 5, and you can see that here. Once we get the input from the members, which will be by end of March, staff has proposed holding a work session of the TPB in April, where the board will receive the results of the questionnaire, but perhaps more importantly, the board will receive the draft set of greenhouse gas reduction goals for on-road transportation, as well as a set of these multi-pathway greenhouse gas reduction strategies based on the results of the survey. The staff will develop these two based on the input from the questionnaire, and the board will discuss and hopefully will be able to reach agreement in April to exactly what will be adopted and added to the plan and the planning process. So that discussion in April, board action in May, and in June, when you see the revised long-range transportation plan, you will see all of this integrated into that plan. The last thing I would say is that the expectation is that with this formal action by the TPB, the greenhouse gas reduction goals, as well as a set of strategies that every member will be able to work to include these considerations into the local decision-making process. So that means in the future, when the TPB updates its long-range transportation plan, it will be seeing projects, programs, and policies that will advance the climate change goals by implementing many of these strategies, as well as advancing other TPB goals. The TPB has adopted similar goals for safety. You will recall 2 years ago, TPB did a regional safety study. We identified, I believe it was 28 different safety enhancement strategies. Those were adopted. Prior to that, we have said reducing congestion is a priority. Reducing single occupant vehicles, increasing transit, rideshare, equity, all of these are other priorities. So climate change strategies and the greenhouse gas reduction goal will now be officially added to this list of planning priorities. And hopefully we will begin to see with every next update of the long range plan, we will begin to see region making progress and hopefully fairly soon achieving these goals. So that's a quick overview of the purpose. I didn't go over all of the 15 questions that are in the questionnaire. All of those 15 questions are directly derived from the climate change mitigation study. You received a detailed briefing of that in December. You have a complete technical report of that. But we are happy to assist should members have any further questions on these 15 strategies or any comments that you might provide us that can improve this questionnaire before we share it with the members. So, Madam Chair, that's a quick overview. I tried not to go over all of the materials that I had provided since you had advised us to use the time for discussion. So I will pause and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kati. Yes, I wanted to make sure that we did have time in case there were questions. And I really will encourage everyone to take time to look at these documents, have your staff and other board members look at these documents and provide the feedback to the TPB staff for the final product of our questionnaire coming out. And then really the goal of this is to make sure that all of us as members of the TPB are going back to our governing boards, our agencies, and having good discussions about this questionnaire so that the feedback that comes back after the questionnaire is reflective of what each of us can do differently in our own areas. And I'm excited about the fact that we will add climate change as a permanent indicator in our long range plan. It's already been said by Mr. Roberts earlier. You know, climate change is something that is important, I think, to all of us, and we can only address the transportation part of it, but making sure that that discussion continues on an ongoing basis is going to be, I think, important. So I'm glad that we are going forward with this today. So with that, I will allow, I'll open the floor for questions for Conti, starting with the District of Columbia. Question in the chat. I don't see any hands up from the district. How about from Maryland?
I have a question. Sorry, I can't.
Yeah,
I
Earl
don't
had
see
a question too.
I didn't see your hand, Mr. Roberts. Go ahead.
I apologize. I don't see my raised hand thing around. But anyway, my question is when and how will the survey be sent out? In the case of Greenbelt, will that go to the city office? Will it come to my email, or how will that go?
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. The survey, we have proposed sending it out by the end of February. As soon as we receive all of your comments by close of business Monday, it will be sent in an email to the primary member of the TPB as well as the alternate. Should the primary member of the TPB be unable to respond or chooses to delegate it to the alternate, they would respond.
Okay. Anyone else from Maryland have any questions of Conti?
Yeah, this is Earl Lewis from MDOT. I've got a comment and then a question. One, maybe minor in the scheme of things, but probably should be recognized earlier. I know Maryland has on the books a greenhouse gas reduction law, and it actually goes from 2006 rather than 2005. So just recognize that. Also, in terms of the time between you get the survey results, which is April 1st and April 20th, is there going to be some thought about maybe having an earlier discussion, even if it's among staff, prior to April 20th? Because I think if we just have April 20th to resolve any consensus and then go right to the meeting with whatever the motion is going to be for vote during the May meeting, it may not be enough discussion. So we may want to consider, even if it's during the pre-board meeting, having another opportunity to have some discussion on the survey results prior to April 20th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We are working with a very tight time frame. We wanted to give members more time. So we have really budgeted up to 5 weeks for members' input. So between receiving the results of the survey and the work session, staff will be doing 2 major activities. One, analyzing the results and determining what is the majority feedback we have received on both elements. What greenhouse gas reduction goals should the TPB adopt, and which of the 15 strategies and what is the input on adopting the 15 strategies. So once that results are analyzed, we will then have to develop draft staff recommendations for TPB to adopt. What would be the recommended greenhouse gas goals for transportation sector is one thing that staff will have to develop. Which of the 15 has received majority input for adopting right now? Which of the 15 the survey results indicate there needs to be more discussion? So all of that needs to be done. We will strive to do it as expeditiously as possible. It's not a very large survey. We have 44 members, so we expect to get 44 responses. I'm hoping we will have 100% response rate. So we will try our best to try and do this. If we are able to do this, and if we can find a time to bring this to the committee or to a subgroup, we will try to do that. I'm just being a little bit hesitant. I also noted in the chat question from Gary. Thank you, Gary. The question was, the climate change mitigation study provided estimates of greenhouse gas reductions from 10 different scenarios. So those 10 scenarios essentially were a combination of these 15 strategies, except they were combined by the technical staff in their own way and their own logic. We made sure that the consultants did not constrain themselves in making assumptions on strategies. So what we are hoping is, from the results of the survey, to identify which of those 15 does the majority of the board say we should adopt them right away, right? If 9 of the 15 receives majority, more than 50% saying let's adopt this, Gary's question is, would we know how much greenhouse gas reductions we can expect from those 9, and how much more would be left behind on the table from the 6 that we may not be adopting right now? So good question, Gary. I don't believe that we can do that in 15 days time. You will recall, for the climate change mitigation study, we had about 6 months to analyze these 10 scenarios. But one of the things that we have already done within the current fiscal year's budget, we have money, and we have also proposed money in the new budget to do exactly that. Whatever strategies that the TPB adopts, we are going to go back, analyze all of them, and provide detailed outcomes from those strategies. So that is what we will be working towards, we will be striving. And the last thing I would say is, it is staff's thinking, if, for example, the board says, of this 15, these 9 we are all ready to adopt right now, we want to continue to discuss these 4, because we have some implementation levels of, as you will recall, the study did not look at how to implement them. That is a pending discussion. So if the TPB decides to engage in that discussion, next year we can adopt even additional strategies to the plan. So this is not a one-time deal that whatever we identify now are all the only things that we will adopt. We will continue to work on it, because we did not discuss how to implement any of these things at all. But perhaps some of those strategies don't need additional discussion on implementation as much as others may. So that's hopefully, Gary, that addresses your question. We will try to get it by June, July of this year.
Thank you, Kanti.
Okay, so before I move on to Virginia, are there any other questions from Maryland? Okay, then I'll call up Mr. Snyder. Mr. Snyder.
Thank you. Conti, could you explain the significance of putting strategies in the long-range plan? This is not a mere aspirational exercise, as I understand it, and that the plan is used to judge and approve projects. So could you explain the significance of this and the seriousness of this effort?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. You probably have been on the board perhaps longer than I've been as staff to the board. So you will remember that back in 1998 was the first set of policy documents that the TPB adopted. It took them 3 years. It's called the vision document. It has 8 goals. Each of those 8 goals have a set of objectives and strategies. Since then, that document has been used as governing to assess, are we as a region adopting and implementing transportation projects and policies that are consistent and will help us achieve these goals that we adopted in 1998. After that, I believe it was 2014, I think Patrick Woyan was the chair then, we adopted something called Regional Transportation Priorities Plan, RTPP. That took the 1998 goals and reduced them to a set of priorities. Since then, we have been using that as these are the priorities we want to see. In both of those documents, climate change had not been as explicitly identified, particularly with regards to what kinds of actions. We all agree we need to address climate change. We all agree we need to reduce greenhouse gases. What are the different ways we can do? That is what this set of strategies will be adopted. So putting it in the plan will be right there to say, as member jurisdictions are advancing projects, to say, do any of your projects support any of these strategies? So it is to inform that level of local decision making.
Thank you. It is 2:00, and we haven't gotten to Wnod or the other agencies, even though Mr. Lewis jumped in from Maryland. Mayor Rischel has her hand up, and I'll remind you, and I want to thank Casey Kostick for putting her comments in the chat. Staff will get that information back to all of us. But Mayor Rischel, I'll go ahead and acknowledge you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification, when we receive the link, will it be accompanied by a document so that we can easily share that with our respective governing bodies and explain in an email what and why this is needed?
Exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Will do. And Ms. Kostick, yes, we will make sure that members can select more than one choice. Thank you.
Okay. And what about Wnod and other agencies? I'm not seeing any other hands up. And like I said, it is after 2. I know people are having to jump off. I see them jumping off. If you'll there's other people that have put some information into the chat. I encourage you to do that, and I'll look forward to those responses from the staff to all of us. If there's no other business that the members want to have, I will remind everyone that the next meeting is scheduled for March 16th. It's planned in person for board members. And unless there's anything else, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And thank you all for your patience and great conversation. And I know we'll continue to have that. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.